Hi everyone, and welcome to our ITSS Verona member series on World Order, section on the UK and European affairs. I am Giovanni Rasio, and today together with Sonia Martínez and Alessandro Spada, we have the immense pleasure to talk about the impact of COVID-19 with Professor Sir Lawrence Freedman from King's College London. Sir Freedman, welcome. Sir Lawrence Freedman is Emeritus Professor of War Studies at King's College London, and in 2009 he was appointed to serve as a member of the official Iraq Inquirer. He has written several remarkable books on international history and strategic theory, such as The Future of War. Thank you, Sir Freedman, for being here today with us. And first of all, I would like to ask you, in your opinion, to what extent can the coronavirus pandemic influence the future of national security strategies of the UK and other European countries? And if there are any useful lessons regarding strategy making that could be potentially integrated? Thank you.
Well, the answer to both questions is yes, but then it becomes more difficult to say exactly what they are. So I think in terms of the lessons for national security that have been drawn, already you can see first a recognition that these things can really hit fast, and that it's not enough to put them on your future things to worry about list. You need to make sure you have the resilience to cope straight away. And I think one of the things that was not appreciated in early 2020 was the effect of global travel on the spread of viruses. It was one of the big, even since 2003 and the SARS outbreak, which had largely been contained in East Asia. This wasn't the case. It traveled very quickly to Europe, and even if the UK, for example, had tried to stop it coming in from China, the fact is it reached the UK from Italy almost certainly, but possibly through France and other means, and it reached these other countries through the UK. It's just very difficult to contain the spread of the virus when you have international travel. And we're now at the stage where international travel has been largely stopped, but you couldn't do that early on. So you have to be prepared, and you have to have stocks. The second thing is that we were caught out by lack of protective equipment, for example, respirators. The other thing, I think, that the more traditional forms of national security is it's drawn attention to supply chains. This is true both in terms of getting what you need to deal with the medical emergency, and then in particular with the question of vaccines. So the politics of international vaccination, as we've seen over the past few months, is intense and quite unprecedented. I mean, I can't remember anything like this before in terms of national needs being met, cooperative arrangements being challenged, emergencies arising in some countries like we have with India at the moment, which not a lot of people are in a position to help, but some can. All of these things are unprecedented. And you can see the UK's view is that we need our own vaccination industry. We didn't have one particularly before. We had pharmaceutical companies, but nothing that could produce vaccines on an industrial scale. And that's in the process of developing. Equally, we now have a diagnostics industry, testing industry that didn't exist at the start of the pandemic. So I think the desire to and other national actors is very strong, not because they're hostile, it's just that they have their own needs. And if you're not able to look after yourself, then you can't assume anybody else will help you. So I think they're two obvious responses in terms of security. I think we I mean, looking to the future, what's hard at the moment is to see how this leaves the international system. If you, at any given stage during this pandemic, you would have made assumptions about who was likely to come out badly, who was likely to come out well, and you would have been wrong. So you start off that China looks in for a very rough time, but China, through measures that only China could probably take, clamped down on it. So China doesn't look so bad, except that the Chinese vaccine is not so great, and there may be problems with that. The UK had a terrible start to the pandemic. It was too late to work out what was going on. The pandemic, the coronavirus came in a number of different places, so it wasn't localized in one part of the country. There were shortages of equipment. We didn't have decent testing and so on. But you look at the position now, and the UK looks pretty good. Not obviously in terms of the death toll, which is still very high, but the deaths are now right down. Cases are now right down. The vaccination program has been a stunning success, and people are now starting to look forward to a reasonably normal summer. So this is a complete turnaround from the view of the UK late last year, indeed even at the start of this year when the numbers were horrendous. So I'd be very cautious about making predictions as to exactly how this is going to change international affairs over the longer term. It may have less long-term effect than one assumes. If the economics can be managed, which is the big question, then I think the other issues are probably manageable. It's the economic knock-on that's the biggest issue. So that was rather a long answer. But...
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So, in light of the Brexit and the global health crisis, how do you assess the current state of the UK-EU relations, and what role does Global Britain play in the future of multipolar?
Well, not good is the answer to UK-EU relations. I think there's been, and the pandemic hasn't helped. So first we had difficult negotiations. Second, which ended in a deal, but it's not a desperately satisfactory deal for anybody. It's better than no deal, but just about. Secondly, the EU, a sort of competition developed over the vaccination programs, which is unfortunate. Essentially, the UK last summer getting supply, and also at the start of this year worked out a pretty sensible policy for demand as well, that it would had a very methodical approach to who should get vaccinated, that it took a gamble on the first dose and the interval between the first dose and second. So all of this has worked pretty well, and by and large, people here are pretty pleased about it. The EU didn't order enough vaccines. One of the vaccines it ordered didn't happen at all, and that all of those things set it back. And unfortunately, AstraZeneca got caught in the middle of all of this. Its factory in Belgium has struggled. These things are difficult. It's not easy to produce new vaccines. And the EU, understandably, wasn't very pleased about this, but sort of blamed Britain as if it somehow had taken unfair advantage, which I just don't think is the case. And that's generally the view in the UK. So unfortunately, a problem largely of the Commission's own making, added to their irritation with Britain, and encouraged many in Britain to think, well, just as well we weren't part of the EU scheme and had our own. So that's the state. In terms of Global Britain, I think these are all slogans. It's better than Britain first. it establishes that the UK does not want to be insular and looking inward. The argument is that the EU certainly was very multilateral and certainly involved us a lot in our neighbourhood, but it wasn't so good for our engagement with the rest of the world. It's not particularly my view, but that was the argument. I think the UK could do what it wanted to do in or out of the EU. But so there's been quite an interesting review published last month by the government called the Integrated Review, which is quite imaginative. It's not. It's trying to work out essentially how do you act as an independent medium power in the modern world? How can you be useful, be productive, without falling out with everybody? In the Pacific region, how can we be more involved there? Reinforcing our relationship with the United States. A major plank of this government's policy is to align itself as much as possible with the Biden administration, despite assumptions that it was intellectually close to Trump, which I don't think was ever true, but that was the assumption. Unfortunately, the review doesn't say very much about the EU. It's not hostile to the EU, it just doesn't say very much about it. So I think the big problem for UK foreign policy at the moment is actually working out how we develop a sensible relationship with our neighbours. It's like, it's like how are you friends after a divorce? It's not easy, but you have to do it. And I think it will get better over time. I think the government sort of realised it wasn't helpful just being just sort of going for anti-Brussels headlines all the time. But there's a long way to go on that, and it requires the EU as well to make an effort. There's some signs that they're trying, but I think it's going to be quite a long haul. So that I think is the big weakness. I think a lot of what's being done and said globally, it makes perfectly good sense, but somehow you've got to sort out this core relationship as well.
Thank you so much, Professor Freedman.
Okay.
My question is, did the detention concerning COVID vaccine supply and export worsen the relations between United Kingdom and the European Union?
Yeah, for reasons I just gave. I mean, I think the British were caught a bit by surprise on this. And I think, if you look at what the Commission was saying in January, they were very optimistic about their supplies. And then they were let down, partly by Pfizer, who weren't able to deliver as much as they promised, but more significantly by AstraZeneca. And that's because it's difficult. I mean, I think people underestimate the problems or just the sheer achievement of having as many vaccines as we've got at the moment that appear to be remarkably successful. So the British got going before everybody else. They've got a very good regulatory system, the very good scientific advice. So the program started a few weeks before the EU and was going fine. And then it became apparent that the EU was struggling. And AstraZeneca, which is a Swedish company as well as a British company, but it's an Oxford-based vaccine, which everybody in the UK was very proud about because it's much cheaper than the Pfizer. It's being produced at cost, sold at cost. It's the main one that's going to be used for international use, and I don't think, compared with the Russians and the Chinese, vaccines have got problems. Pfizer's too expensive and difficult to use. So yeah, everybody's quite pleased about this. Then all of a sudden you get problems. And then of course there was the issue with blood clots and so on. But in the middle of all of this, it seemed to be that somehow Britain was getting the blame for problems which were largely on the EU side. And then if you follow social media, it's not hard to see quite a strong feeling within EU countries that somehow the UK had tricked the Commission out of a lot of its vaccines, and that they were going to the UK when they should have been going to the EU. I mean, they're just the contracts. And the EU has now brought a case against AstraZeneca, but my view is it probably won't go very far. So it's worsened, undoubtedly, it's worsened relations in terms of the mood music, especially when it looked like the EU might stop exports to the UK, which in a small degree it's done, but not in a way that's affected the UK programme. Now, the EU's 2 months behind the UK, essentially. It varies between countries. Some countries are quite close, others a bit further behind. But by and large, the big countries are about 2 months behind the UK. And that will continue. I don't think they're going to catch up. But eventually, September, October, they'll catch up. And then hopefully, everybody's vaccinated. We're visiting each other's countries again. And relations will be a bit easier. So I'd like to think this was a blip, but it hasn't helped at the start of this year.
Certainly. Thank you, Sir Freedman. So we would have one more question for you. And this is considering the impact of COVID. Would you say that the UK and the European Union were not as resilient as they thought they were?
Almost certainly. I mean, if you look at Europe, very few European countries have come out, none have come out unscathed. Some have done better than others, but I don't like these league tables of deaths, but because actually quite a lot of the smaller EU countries that seem to have done fine in the first wave have had a terrible time in the second. Italy, Spain, France, UK, and even Germany have not done well. So all of them, you can compare and contrast, but all of them have had a tough time. And I think there were two, in the UK's case, I can't speak for others, there were two reasons for this. One was the SARS pandemic of 2003. And because people got scared about that, but it was in the end largely confined to a few countries and didn't reach us, there was a feeling that the spread could be contained of a new virus, of a new coronavirus. And secondly, our modeling was based on influenza for pandemics. And this isn't influenza, it's different. So it's more contagious. And the last big scare we had in 2009-10, there were all sorts of alarms raised then. This is the swine flu, and not very much happened. I mean, there were excess deaths and so on, but nothing on the scale to which people had anticipated. So I think that led to complacency. I think basically we were complacent, and we didn't realize just how drastic the instruments would have to be. Because, if you'd said in January, the major European countries would be shutting down their economies, stopping inward travel, trying to test everybody that they could test in a matter of months, it would have seemed preposterous. So it's a failure of imagination as well. There's just, you can talk about these threats, but until they happen, it's very hard to mobilize the population and the government to take dramatic action. After, when they realized that, I think they all did what they could, but then they got complacent again. Everybody got complacent in the summer because they thought they cracked it, and despite the epidemiologists saying there'd be a new wave, they just weren't ready for it, and they believed that they could have a much more nuanced and flexible policy than turned out to be the case. Now, we have to hope that mass vaccination will work. And I personally in UK now, we're down to very few hospitalizations and so on. It looks okay, partly because we started the year with an incredibly severe lockdown. So we have the vaccination program and the lockdown going together, which worked in the end worked quite well. So we have to hope that we're seeing it through. But I find what happened this past winter in a way less forgivable than what happened last spring, because the evidence was all there, the models were all there, and the politicians were desperate not to believe them.
Thank you very much for your time and your answers, Sir Freedman. It was a pleasure to have you here for the first episode of ITSS Verona podcast on the UK and European affairs. Thank you very much.
That was helpful. Thanks very much.